Hello, everybody, and welcome to the EcoMindset Podcast. In this week's episode, I sit down with the Vice President of the newly formed Union of Law Professors at McGill, Kirsten Anker. We got to discuss McGill's resistance to unions, the state of unionization across Canadian universities, and also some key issues touching the McGill campus recently, such as the encampment in support of Palestinian rights, the Mohawk mothers who are advocating for the protection of potential grave sites of their ancestors. And we also discussed Francois Legault's move to make students who come to McGill from outside of Quebec, but within Canada, pay international tuition fees, therefore really limiting the number of Anglophone students that can come to Montreal. Here's the interview. Welcome to the EcoMindset. At a time when the climate is crumbling, inequality is on the rise, and our leaders are beating the drums of war, let's talk about the issues, the solutions, and the power dynamics that got us here. All over the world, people are getting involved. The resistance is growing and progress is within reach. Join us to discover, to debate, and to learn about the ongoing struggle for the environment, for peace, and for social justice in Quebec, Canada, and around the world. My name is Alex Tyrrell, and I'm your host for this podcast, The EcoMindset. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the EcoMindset. Today, we have a very special episode for you. We're going to dive into some of the issues that are taking place at the McGill campus. One of the issues that maybe not everybody is aware of is that the Law Professors Association has a newly formed union that is going on strike. And we're joined today by Kirsten Anker, who is the Vice President of this newly formed union. Thank you, Kirsten, for coming to the podcast. Can you fill us in about what's been taking place? What is happening with the law professors at McGill?
Yeah, so we're coming up to our 8th week of strike, which I think is a record for faculty unions in Quebec. As you mentioned, we're a new union. We were certified a year and a half ago and have been negotiating with McGill to get our very first collective agreement. And the reason we're on strike is that we don't think the university is bargaining with us in good faith. For a start, they have contested our certification from the beginning. They don't think that we are the appropriate unit to the level. So it's kind of unusual to have a faculty level union. There are some examples around elsewhere in Quebec and in Canada, but it is unusual. But the tribunal did accept our reasons for wanting to do so, basically because we're distinctive enough and freedom of association means that largely we have a say in who is the we that organises. So McGill has contested that. They say they can't work with unit by unit associations. So it's kind of been bizarre being in a bargaining situation with a party that's trying to contest your very right to exist as a union. So that kind of sets the tone. And they've just been doing what I'm learning is very classic boss strategies of dragging out the negotiations, giving us very few dates. For example, since the beginning of the strike, we've had one date with them over a 4-month period. The next is at the end of August. So that's not an indication of someone who's in a hurry to get an agreement concluded. And apart from the timing of it, there's just some very stringent positions that they're taking that go against the very idea of what a collective agreement is. For example, they want to, when we're referring to existing regulations and incorporating them, they want to have the capacity to change those regulations unilaterally, which, is not really how contracts work.
Right. And just so people know about what's the percentage of professors at McGill that are unionized at this point?
So it's really just us that are certified, the Faculty of Law. So we're 43 members at the moment. There are 2 other faculties who have applied for certification. So that means that they've been able to get a majority of members of the defined bargaining unit. So there's education came first after us, and then the Faculty of Arts, who a majority of that bargaining unit applied or paid for a membership card, but they have yet to be certified because they too are being challenged. So in terms of percentage, it's a very small percentage of the overall number of professors. But we feel that it is a wave that, from talking to people around the university, it seems that it's an unstoppable wave at the moment. So we're kind of at the forefront of that.
Right. It seems like McGill is a little bit behind in terms of unionization compared to some other universities in Canada.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there was a major wave in the 70s, and I think that's when, I'm not an expert in this by any means, but that was my understanding that that's when the most of the universities in Quebec unionized. There is one other institution in Quebec, the HEC, that is not doesn't have unionized faculty. So we're the last holdout, if you will, and there's historic and cultural reasons for that in Quebec. Around the nation, I mean, I think there's been sort of patchy histories there, depending on various particular local politics. But in general, like by far the majority of universities, the faculty are unionized.
Right. And I read somewhere that McGill is planning for the students to come back in September without any law professors. How is this going to work?
Well, I mean, they're not saying that it's without law professors. They're assuring students that everything's going to be fine. Obviously, there's a lot of money at stake and reputation, but they're not giving any clear sense of how they're planning for that to happen, because we've made it very clear that unless we have a collective agreement, when we're going to be on strike at the beginning of the semester.
Right. And there's a social sciences conference that's coming up on Friday. Your union has called for people to boycott it. Can you tell us a bit about that and why it's important and why you've chosen this tactic?
Yeah, so that's Congress. Congress is the largest federation of humanities and social sciences associations. So these are the scholarly associations that publish journals and hold conferences. So normally this conference happens once a year. I think it's something like 8,000 participants usually. So it's an honor for an institution like McGill to host that. This year it was to be at McGill starting last Wednesday. We had initially reached out to the Law Association. It's called the Canadian Law and Society Association, and they were immediately on board with us. Of course, we're not going to cross a picket line. We're not going to go into the law school. We'll organise an alternative venue, which they managed to do. Kudos to them, because it's not easy to move. It's already hard to organise these things, and then to do so, to move at the last minute. I'm very appreciative of their support, and they really took the front line of bringing that message to the rest of the participants. So I don't have I haven't been dealing with these. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it's a majority of the associations that either moved online or to an alternative location around McGill, or some cancelled sessions altogether. So that was very comforting to have that show of support. I mean, the idea being, of course, that this is a struck campus, a struck employer, and those who wish to show solidarity with our struggle will not cross a picket line to come.
Yeah, excellent. It's great to see that you're getting so much support from your peers and from people from different institutions as well, willing to make big changes to their plans in order to support you. Is there a possibility in the future maybe your newly formed union will merge into a larger union that represents the entire
I mean, I think the future is interesting. I'm learning about labor law and right. Organizing as I'm going. And I know that there is a kind of movement towards what's called micro unions. So the idea that you have smaller units that are, more nimble and can really kind of communicate well with their membership, but then joining in some kind of federation with other unions. So that's definitely a potential. I think at the moment, it's interesting that each unit can really respond to the particularities of its situation and bring those issues forward to the bargaining table. Of course, there are many issues that we share together, and there's no reason why we can't come together on shared issues. As is the status quo. There are university policies that affect us all the same, and there are practices and policies within each faculty that work differently. So I don't see why we can't do that as unions as well. So, as I mentioned, there is kind of a wave of unionization. There may be some faculties who don't find it interesting for whatever reason. Maybe they have private funding and so their financial situations are different, or they don't have the same kind of governance issues that we've had. And I think that's fair enough. Each collective should be able to decide that for themselves, but we're here to support those who are coming after us and to share what we're learning in the process.
Excellent. And what are some of the main issues that are important to your members?
Look, this really started out of concerns around governance. So unlike usual employment situations, a university has historically, traditionally been thought of as a community. So generally the administrative positions, the high echelon of administrative positions are professors who cycle in and out and then come back to their colleagues afterwards. And then we've seen in the last couple of decades a shift in that model, with the university acting more and more like a corporation. So the people who end up in the administrative positions start becoming career administrators, and some of them get paid. In our faculty, there's like a 3 times differential between the salary of the dean and the lowest paid professor. So just, in terms of, if you look at the direction of the salary mass as well, we've just had some statistics, I think they're coming out on Twitter on Monday, comparing the relative growth of the salary mass of top administrators compared to professors. So there's definitely a bloating in the administration. There's a centralization in governance. And this all came out in COVID when, of course, it's a very sensitive issue, people's health, the health of their families. And there was some heavy-handed directives from the central administration that did not take a very sensitive approach to people's different family situations and kind of concerns about susceptibility to the disease. And that was, there was a lot of other issues that had been coming for years, but that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah. And what about the composition of the board of governors of McGill? I hear that there's a lot of corporate representation there.
I don't really know much about the composition of the board of governors. I know that there's one member that we spoke to recently who is the person responsible for labour relations, and he has been a lawyer on the employer's side. So that gives you an indication of often where allegiances lie. And we haven't heard a peep out of them, honestly, since McGill's been facing a number of issues to do with community relations with the Mohawk mothers, and the litigation around the new UVic site and the potential for there to be grave sites there and so on. There's the encampment. There's the funding. The funding problems with Quebec. There's a number of fronts on which McGill seems to be struggling with, negotiating and dealing with its constituents.
Yeah. Well, you set that up well, actually, because those are the 3 issues that I wanted to talk about in the second half of the interview. So the encampment, the Mohawk mothers, and also the change in Quebec funding for students who are from outside of Quebec. So maybe we could start with the encampment. As a lot of people know, it's been going on for well over a month now. There's students that are camped out that are protesting the university's policy of support for Israel and their ties to Israeli companies, particularly in the defense industry. I know that McGill has tried twice to get injunctions to have the encampment removed, but they've both been refused. I was wondering if we could get your take on this and the involvement of your association.
Yeah, so there was actually one injunction brought by 2 students, right, and a second injunction brought by McGill themselves. They also made a separate plea to the request to the police to disband the encampment early on, which was refused. You just have to look at how things have been dealt with elsewhere, and it's possible, as it happened at UQAM with the encampment that came later, to deal with it in a more productive way. Yes, there are going to be differences of opinion around how to deal with the war in Israel, Gaza, and the kinds of pressure to put on the university, the responsibilities we have as a university community. But there are different ways of dealing with that and dealing with the legitimate right to protest. So they've been overplaying or just kind of exaggerating the degree to which the camp form some kind of threat. I walk past it nearly every day. I was there as an observer in the early days, and I was incredibly impressed by the degree of organization of the camp to really make sure that any offensive messaging on signs was taken down, that potential troublemakers within were kept out of the fence. When there was a counter protest, they were very forward about keeping a distance between the two lines of protesters and so on. So kudos to them for the organisation. And given that, and given the constitutional context of the right to protest, McGill's treatment of that lacked some nuance and understanding, let's say.
Yeah, and a bit of reality too, right? Saying that it was dangerous to people and that sort of thing. I was also at McGill just a couple of weeks ago when the riot police intervened on campus in response to an occupation that happened in the administration building. And personally, I found that police response was completely overblown. That, when you see people, chanting, we're not violent, peaceful protests, and being hit by riot police with batons and pepper spray and that sort of thing, I think that it doesn't say very positive things about the university or about the Montreal police and the state of Canadian democracy. Myself, as I was actually leaving that confrontation, the police had thrown tear gas onto the street not far away from me, and for people who are leaving the protests, I mean, luckily nobody got hit by those canisters, but somebody could get hit in the head. It could be very dangerous, And,
yeah, that was very troubling, and also just not a rational response. I mean, I think the target, I mean, the cause for concern was the protesters who were barricaded inside the building. So I think that the cause for concern for police was those who were barricaded inside the building, but of course they couldn't access them, and so they tear gassed the people outside. They were the people who were not barricaded in the building. It was.
Yeah, and a similar event had occurred in 2011, also November 2011, where there was a similar occupation, and that the police had cleared off the area in front of the James Administration Building. I know at that time there was people who were injured, much more so than what we saw a couple of weeks ago. But it's unfortunate that the right to protest is continuously called into question around these things. So another issue is the Mohawk mothers. So they've been raising concerns about the redevelopment of the Victoria Hospital, which is just up the hill from McGill and part of McGill's property. They say that there are grave sites on this land, and I'm not 100% familiar with what their demands are, but I would assume that they would want at least some archaeological digs, if not the relocation of the entire project.
So initially, they sought an injunction to stop the work that was about to start before appropriate archaeological and surveys had happened with the technologies that allow you to detect human remains and so on. So they were successful in that injunction, and there was a team set up. They had to negotiate. McGill was ordered to negotiate a way to proceed with this investigation with the Mohawk mothers and their experts. And so there was a team of archaeologists appointed. And then, although there were some positive results in the sense of positive detections of potential sites, that was dismissed. Forgive me if I'm not remembering the details exactly, but this is my understanding from my last reading. And then McGill and the Quebec I can't remember the acronym, but the Quebec Society for the Infrastructure dismissed unilaterally this team. So just when maybe some results were coming up that should be investigated further, they dismissed the team. So it was sort of like this performative, okay, we have to go through this process, but let's just do it as quickly as possible and get it out of the way, which is kind of the sense I have of the approach to consultation. Okay, we know reconciliation is this thing in Canada and we have to go through the steps, but we'll just do it as quickly as we can and move on. And the whole approach, there's been a couple of meetings, I wasn't at them, but heard from my indigenous colleagues who were present, where it's just this sort of bureaucratic mindset, not connecting with this is a very significant issue for people whose relatives might be buried up there and who otherwise have been subject to brutal assimilationist measures over the centuries, and all all the other devastating impacts of colonization, and they're being spoken to in this kind of bureaucratic language, like, "Oh, we did this testing, and let's move on."
Yeah, a little bit.
So it's just like a bit of tone deafness there too.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. It makes me think about what happened in Manitoba with the issue about searching the municipal landfill where 3 Indigenous women are presumed to have their remains located. And one thing that really struck me about that was that there was a provincial election that was fought, in part around this issue, and the governing Conservative Party actually went out and they put billboards, "We will not search the landfill." It's incredible how disrespectful certain people can be, and that government was tossed out. Now the new NDP government with Wab Kinew is starting to search the landfill, so I think that a lot of these times, people are quick to dismiss, "Oh, it's not important," and all this. It's, we don't care. We can go forward with the construction. But, as you said, it's completely tone deaf, to where we should be at in terms of reconciliation and, it's coming to terms with the past of Canada and, to a certain degree, the present as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just to conclude, there's the issue of the funding of McGill through the students from outside of Quebec who come to study. And for a long time, people in Quebec had the lowest tuition. Then there was people from other Canadian provinces, and then there was international. And the tuition would go up at each level. But now the Quebec government has said that there's going to be no discount for people from other Canadian provinces, and so they'll have to pay the same amount or a higher amount than they used to. Obviously, for people coming from Ontario or British Columbia that were thinking about studying McGill, having such a dramatic cutback in government funding is really a bit of an attack on the English post-secondary institutions in Quebec. What do you make of this move by the Legault government to restrict this funding and to sort of go after the people who come to Montreal to study?
So I say this as an Anglophone immigrant from Australia who now has 2 Francophone children born in Quebec and are going to grow up, and that's the language of their schooling. And I can't help but feel I get the history and I get the politics behind it, but it doesn't feel like a forward-looking way to grow this beautiful city of Montreal that so many of us love to call home, and it is so appealing to students and other people who enjoy the wealth of inspiration that a multicultural environment can bring. And I think, I'm committed to this being a Francophone province. And as I said, my kids speak French. But I think there's other ways of going about it than the punitive. It just seems very short-sighted and self-defeating to gut one of the premier institutions in Montreal. If that's, it just seems like a very cheap political shot to me.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with that. I think that, there's a lot of positive aspects of having people come from the rest of Canada to study in Quebec, just as there is having people from Quebec go and study in other Canadian provinces. And I find it's unfortunate that these, ideological lines taken by the Quebec government are limiting people's access to education and to critical services sometimes. Well, we're against that in the Green Party of Quebec, and I wish you the best of luck on your strike and on the negotiations with McGill. I hope that they come to the table and sign that first collective agreement with you as quickly as possible. And of course, we'll continue to support the encampment, and maybe I'll see you down there sometime.
Thank you very much.
Well, that concludes this episode of the EcoMindset Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Kirsten Anker. We got to talk about some really important issues. I think that's very important for universities to be unionized all across Canada. I was really struck by the fact that so few professors at McGill are unionized. I think it was also a good conversation about Legault's moves to increase the price of tuition for out-of-province students, and we got to touch on the encampment as well, something that's really important that we're going to continue to support here in the Green Party of Quebec. If you like this episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe on YouTube or on all the different podcast platforms. See you next time.